Today, we're cracking open the source files and looking at the chilling documentary evidence surrounding the terrifying paradox of John Wayne Gacy. We're going to treat this like a gripping true crime deep dive, using the actual forensic and psychological case studies to figure out, how exactly did a monster operate totally unnoticed for so long? All right, let's just get right into it.
Here's how we're breaking down the case file today. We'll look at the killer clown persona, the roots of the monster, dive into the psychology of a predator, trace the hunt and capture, and finally, look at the ongoing work of identifying the victims.
Okay, Section 1, the killer clown persona, hiding in plain sight. So take a look at John Wayne Gacy. Between 1972 and 1978, this guy literally managed to murder at least 33 young men and boys in a Chicago suburb called Norwood Park Township. And the wildest part, for 6 entire years, he was committing these absolute atrocities right inside his unassuming ranch-style house without really drawing any significant suspicion from the cops or even his own neighbors. Now, this is where the stark juxtaposition really hits you. To the public eye, Gacy was a pillar of the community. The guy had been a successful KFC manager in Waterloo, Iowa, an award-winning VP for the local Jaycees. He owned a contracting business, and of course, famously entertained neighborhood kids as Pogo the Clown. But his private life, a completely different, sadistic reality. The documentary sources show how he'd actually lure victims into his home, often totally tricking them into putting on handcuffs by saying he was showing them a magic trick. And once they were bound, he subjected them to unimaginable torture before murdering them, usually by strangling them with a garrote. It's just completely chilling.
Moving on to Section 2, Roots of the Monster. We're going to trace the timeline of his early life, drawing directly on events documented by researchers at Radford University.
These timeline events really lay the groundwork for how this monster was formed. Let's look at the progression. Back in 1946, around the time he was just 4 years old, severe physical and verbal abuse from his alcoholic father started. His dad would constantly belittle him, calling him dumb and stupid. Then, jump to 1953, he suffers a massive neurological trauma. He gets hit in the head by a swing, which actually caused a blood clot in his brain and led to these periodic blackouts for years. And then we hit a massive, flashing red flag in 1968. Before the infamous murder spree even began, Gacy was convicted in Iowa for the sodomy of a teenage boy. He was sentenced to 10 years, but, and this is crazy, he served only 18 months before they let him out.
Which brings us to Section 3, Psychology of a Predator. Let's look closely at the Sonny Oswego assessment.
To really wrap our heads around his behavior, we have to view it through a specific clinical lens. Researchers point directly to antisocial personality disorder, or ASPD. This diagnosis is absolutely crucial. It's the key that finally explains that terrifying paradox we talked about earlier, how someone could commit such heinous, unspeakable crimes in private while playing the role of a totally normal, highly celebrated citizen in public. And when you look at the Sonny Oswego clinical assessment, Gacy displayed classic textbook ASPD traits. He totally weaponized this superficial charm to lower his victims' defenses, right? Which let him bind and manipulate them. He also had severe emotional instability that ended up completely ruining his marriages. Add to that this extreme grandiosity and an inflated ego, he absolutely loved being in positions of authority because it meant he had control over people. But most chillingly, he showed zero remorse, literally none. When investigators and researchers sat down to interview him later, he talked about his 33 murders with absolutely no emotional sentiment whatsoever. He just rattled them off in this detached laundry list kind of way.
Section 4, the hunt and capture. Piercing the facade. Basically, if he was so incredibly good at hiding, how did they finally stop him? We really have to ask ourselves, after 6 years of operating completely under the radar, what was the actual turning point? How did this meticulously crafted double life finally unravel?
Well, the unraveling happened in 3 distinct steps, beautifully outlined by former prosecutor Terry Sullivan and Detective Joseph Kozenchak in their accounts of the case. Step 1, December 1978. A local teenager named Robert Peast vanishes right after telling his mom he was going to go talk to a contractor about a summer job. And yeah, that contractor was John Wayne Gacy. Step 2. D's Play's Chief of Detectives Kozenchak hones in on Gacy and launches this intense, just relentless police surveillance campaign. Finally, Step 3, all this pressure culminates in the execution of search warrants on Gacy's home. And it was during these searches that officers noticed this unmistakable, horrific smell of decay. That scent is what led them to the ultimate house of horrors, just waiting right there beneath the floorboards in his crawl space. Section 5. Identifying the victims. The ongoing quest for justice. Now it's time to shift our focus away from the killer and talk about the real tragedy here, his victims.
As we know, Gacy was responsible for the murders of 33 known young men and boys. To hide what he'd done, he buried 26 of them straight into the dirt of his own crawl space. 3 more were buried elsewhere on the property, and then, when he literally ran out of room, he threw his final 4 victims into the Des Plaines River. Just to put that into perspective, at the time of his conviction, this was the highest number of homicides by a single individual in U.S. legal history.
But the reason this case is still an active, ongoing pursuit of justice is that, shockingly, 5 of those victims, boys recovered from his home way back in late 1978 and early 1979, they still remain unidentified to this very day. Yet, there's actually a lot of hope right now. The Cook County Sheriff's Police Department has noted that modern DNA technology has advanced light years beyond what they had during the original investigation. They've gone back, successfully tested the remains, and they now have actionable DNA profiles for all 5 of those unidentified victims. It is such a powerful reminder that, honestly, forensic science never forgets. The pursuit of justice certainly doesn't end just because the killer was caught and executed. Which leaves us with this final, kind of provocative thought. As modern science keeps peeling back the masks of these historical predators, and investigators tirelessly work to name these final 5 boys, how many other forgotten victims across the country are finally on the verge of getting their names back? It really makes you wonder what other massive cold cases are about to be blown wide open. Anyway, thank you for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this dive into the documentary source files gave you a much clearer understanding of this incredibly dark chapter of history.